My appointment to the signals deck of the GRS Unyielding Principle came through 43 days after I finished my basic certification at the Grevhan Syndicate's Orbital Academy on Veth Prime. I was 19 standard cycles old. I had never seen combat. I had never seen a dead ship. I had, in my entire life, never once thought about humanity. Most of us hadn't. The briefing on our outbound transit described the operation in language so dismissive it barely qualified as tactical. Sector Liaison Commander Soreth, broad-shouldered, 30 years in signals, particular confidence of a male who has never been surprised, stood at the briefing rail and called it a customs enforcement action. He used that phrase twice. He smiled the second time. The target was a human convoy. 3 vessels bearing registration consummos for something called the Ashen Compact, a freight cooperative operating out of the Kareth reaches on Earth's distant fringe, bulk transports, long-haul carriers, the largest registered at 4 kilometers, stem to stern, which is a meaningful number until you understand that the Syndicate's enforcement tier ran warships averaging 8 kilometers, and the Unyielding Principle herself was nearly 12. They haul ore, Soreth said, and there was laughter from the back row. Pressed mineral slurry. The manifest is certified. The crime is unpaid tariff on Corridor 7 transit. 11 years of it. More laughter. I did not laugh. I was too new to know whether laughing was appropriate, and too new to know it wasn't. We were 7,000 ships. They were 3. The math felt so lopsided, it didn't feel like math at all. It felt like paperwork. My station was in the secondary signals hub on Deck 14, a long room of flat consoles and dim overhead panels, staffed mostly by junior personnel in their first postings. We monitored the passive sensor net, logged contact data, relayed traffic between the principal and her escorts. On an operation like this, the secondary hub would barely be called upon. I was grateful for the quiet. I had been translation sick on the transit, the low oscillating nausea that hits young operators inside a long corridor fold without adequate shielding. I had spent the first 6 hours with my forehead against the cool alloy rim of my console, breathing slowly, trying not to embarrass myself. Senior Analyst Vane, fiery, pale secondary lids, the flat patience of someone who had watched too many green recruits fold on their first deep transit. Set a small hydration packet beside my elbow. Comment. Drink it before we decelerate. The transit sick get worse when we drop velocity. I drank it. I kept my eyes on my screen. The human convoy was on sensors at 0.4 light minutes when the first anomaly appeared. I noticed it because it was my job to notice things, and because I had nothing else to do except watch readouts and keep my internal organs settled. The anomaly was small, turn signature on the long passive, that didn't fit the registered profile of any of the 3 Ashen Compact vessels. It was faint. It flickered. It could have been sensor wash from the convoy's own drive plumes, or background scatter from the debris field. I flagged it in the log. I did not escalate it. I was 19 years old and on my first posting, and I had no frame of reference for what an anomalous return signature meant. Senior Analyst Vane glanced at my flag without leaning over. Locked it, she asked. Yes, Senior Analyst. She looked back at her own screen. I assumed she agreed it was nothing. The intercessor was textbook. Commander Soreth's voice came through the main speaker on all decks at 14:33. 7 station time, measured and unhurried, the voice of a bureaucrat who has done this 1,100 times. Attention, unregistered convoy bearing Ashen Compact identification. You are operating in Grevhan Syndicate controlled corridor without valid passage. Documentation. Cut your drives. Prepare for boarding inspection. Non-compliance will be treated as hostile intent under Syndicate Commerce, Ordinance 7. For seconds of silence. Then the lead human ship responded. The voice that came back was calm. Not the careful calm of someone trying to appear composed. The baseline calms of someone for whom this moment did not register as particularly interesting. A male voice, older, flat as the space between stars. Syndicate vessel, the human said. This convoy is operating under Ashen Compact trade rights. Article 14, as filed with the Galactic Commerce Authority in the 3rd cycle of year 6219. You will find the documentation on record. We are not stopping. Laughter again. Soreth allowed it. He was already issuing positioning orders to the escort screen, 12 warships spreading to bracket the convoy. in a standard non-compliant interdiction formation. Textbook. I was watching my long passive readout. The anomaly returned. Not faint this time. It was not scatter. It was not drive wash. It was a contact, a distinct, solid, coherent return signature that was not attached to any of the 3 registered Ashen Compact vessels. I ran the auto classification and got an error code I had never seen before, which I later learned meant the system had attempted to match the contact against its 4.7 million indexed ship profiles and returned no match. Escalated it. My hand was steady. I was surprised that my hand was steady. Senior Analyst Vane, long passive anomaly on Flag 8, contact. Unregistered classification system returning null match. Vane turned from her screen. She looked at mine. She looked at it for 4 full seconds without speaking. Then she stood up. I had not seen Vane stand up for anything in the 40 hours we had been on duty together. She was a sitting analyst, the kind who processed information from a chair with the economy of long habit. She stood up, looked at my screen, reached past me to run a manual rescan. The rescan returned the same contact, solid, unmoving, already inside our escort screen's outer envelope. "How long has this been there?" she asked. "First appearance was 11 minutes ago. Senior Analyst. Weak return, I flagged it, but didn't escalate. The second appearance was 40 seconds ago. Solid return." "Size?" I told her. Vane went still. Not the stillness of someone who is confused. The stillness of someone who has understood something and is deciding what to do with the understanding. "Get Commander Soreth's signals officer," she said. "Now." The word came down from the primary hull team 19 seconds later, and by then the passive net had lit up with a dozen more contacts, each of them resolving out of what we had assumed was the convoy's drive shadow, each of them returning the same null classification code. 3 ships. Not 3. The 3 Ashen Compact bulk transports were still there, still running their ore haul silhouettes, still holding their logged dimensions and registered mass. They were exactly what the manifest said they were. Compressed mineral slurry. 11 years of unpaid tariffs. What the manifest did not say, what no manifest, no archive, no syndicate intelligence file had ever suggested might exist, was that the Ashen Compact convoy had arrived with an escort. 41 ships. Not small ships. My console was producing a running classification attempt, trying to match the contacts against the index database, turning null after null after null. I ran a parallel cross-reference against known human military configurations and got a partial match. Partial, because the match index was built from 20-year-old survey data, and the shapes on my screen were not the shapes in the survey data. The shapes on my screen were larger, substantially larger. The sensor return on the smallest contact was a vessel 2.9 kilometers long, with a weapons array profile that did not correspond to any defensive configuration I had ever been taught to recognize. I was not trained to say what I said next. It was not a protocol action. It came out of some unprocessed part of my thinking that had been working quietly behind everything else since the first faint anomaly had appeared. 11 minutes ago. "Senior Analyst," I said, "these are not freighters." "No," Vane said, "they are not." "Did we know?" She did not answer that. She was already on the command channel. What I know of the next 4 minutes comes from the signals log I was running, from the partial bridge feeds that were archived to secondary storage before the primary feed was interrupted, and from the 18 minutes I spent afterwards staring at my own readouts trying to understand what they were telling me. Commander Soreth ordered the interdiction screen to hold position. He hailed the convoy again. His voice did not change. Give him that. Whatever he was seeing on his own displays, his voice on the command channel remained the voice of a bureaucrat who had done this 1,100 times. "Attention Ashen Compact convoy. You have deployed unauthorized military hulls within a syndicate enforcement corridor. Stand down all vessels immediately. This is your final." The human male's voice came back, the same flat baseline calm. "We have filed the documentation," the human said. "Article 14. On record, we are not stopping." And then the voice changed. Not louder, not harder. Just different in the way a room changes when someone walks in who wasn't invited and is not surprised to be unwelcome. "But I'll give you one courtesy. Get your inspection teams off the approach vector, the one on your port side, specifically. You've got 9 ships that are going to be in our engine wake when we accelerate, and we would prefer not to make this more complicated than it needs to be. There was a pause on the command channel. A long one. Then Soreth ordered the port screen to hold. He did not order it to withdraw. The human's voice came back once more. And, this is the part I have thought about more than anything else. In the 8 months since the unyielding principal limped into dock at Veth Prime, with a hull breach on 3 decks and 44% of her escort screen destroyed. All right, the human said. Your choice. The weapon systems on the Ashen Compact escort were, our technical analysts later concluded, somewhere between 60 and 80 years old. This was not their assessment at the time. At the time, no one was assessing anything. We were receiving damage reports and trying to understand the shape of what was happening to us. What the analyst concluded afterward is that the 41 escort hulls were not new ships. They were not advanced ships. They were human warships from a class that had been in production in the late 2nd century of the Compact's founding, built in a period when humanity was not at war with anyone, built at a pace, and to a specification that the Syndicate's own survey teams had apparently observed and then failed to adequately index. The ships were old. They were not slow. Exchange lasted 4 minutes, 6 cents in seconds. When it was over, 214 Syndicate warships had ceased transmitting. Want to be clear about what 214 ships means, because I did not fully understand it at the time. I was watching returns disappear from my long passive display. I was logging contacts. I was doing the work I had been trained to do, and the work was giving me data. And the data was describing something my training had not included a category for. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, 214 ships. The Ashen Compact escort lost 2. The unyielding principal was not in the first exchange. She was positioned 5 light seconds back from the interdiction screen, which is standard command positioning. The flagship holds deep coordinates, commits last. Commander Soreth had the full picture on his battle displays, and I had only the secondary feed and my own sensor returns. I could see enough. The escort screen was disintegrating, not in the way combat simulations describe disintegration, not the orderly attrition. The screen that fights until it cannot fight anymore. It was asymmetric. The human ships were not engaging in any pattern I could identify. They were not sweeping through the screen the way a superior force sweeps. They were selecting. Methodical. Each human hull was targeting specific Syndicate vessels in a sequence that, I realized later, specifically designed to collapse the formation's coherence. To prevent the screen from concentrating its fire, to keep each Syndicate ship isolated and unable to work in concert with its neighbors. It was not overwhelming force, it was applied precision, which is worse in its way, because overwhelming force you can conceptualize. Precision means someone planned this. Precision means someone looked at your 7,000 ships and worked out exactly how to take them apart. Senior Analyst Vane was standing. She had been standing since the contact resolved. She was watching my displays and hers simultaneously, and I watched her face instead of my screen for a handful of seconds, because I wanted to see something I could understand. Expression was not panic. It was not confusion. It was the look of someone who has added a column of numbers twice and gotten the same answer, times, and does not like the answer. They let us see the 3 transports, she said. Not to me, not to anyone specific. They were the bait. She was right. I had not thought of it that way yet, but she was right. The 3 registered bulk transports had been positioned where our passive sensors would find them easily. The 41 escort hulls had been positioned where our passive sensors would not find them easily. In the drive shadow, in the scatter, at the edge of detection. We had been looking at 3 ships for 11 days of transit, and the convoy had been 44 ships the entire time. Running quietly, waiting, they had let us come to them. They had let us spread our interdiction screen. They had let Commander Soreth issue his orders. They filed the documentation, I said. I was not sure why I said it. Article 14, Vane said. Commercial transit rights. A filing that would take 11 years to work through the GCA's administrative queue, by which time the tariff issue would be moot. Why? Because they would have been paid. She looked at me. The Compact's tariff dispute is about 4 billion credits in unpaid passage fees. They filed. We ignored the filing. Someone decided it would be faster to send an enforcement fleet than to process the paperwork. I looked at my screen. 487 ships lost. Was the filing legitimate? I asked. Does it matter now? The unyielding principal entered the engagement at the 38-minute mark. By then we had lost 1,904 ships from the original interdiction screen, and what remained of the screen was attempting a withdrawal toward our position. Commander Soreth committed the principal because there was nothing else left to commit. I do not know everything that Soreth was thinking. I know he was not a coward. I know he believed at the moment he committed the flagship that the sheer mass and firepower of a 12-kilometer Syndicate command ship would alter the arithmetic. The principal had 11 primary weapon batteries and a secondary screen that could theoretically engage 300 simultaneous contacts. She fired for 9 minutes. She did not miss. Soreth gunners were good, and the targeting systems on a ship of the principal's class are the best the Syndicate manufactures. She hit what she aimed at. It was not enough. The human escort had 41 ships at the opening of the engagement. By the time principal committed, they had 39. We had destroyed 2 more in the preceding exchanges, at a cost of approximately 250 of our own. 39 human hulls, arrayed in a rotating formation that distributed the principal's fire across their combined defensive screens, each hull absorbing a fraction of what the flagship could deliver, none of them taking the full weight. I was logging contacts. I was doing the work. My hands were steady, which I no longer found surprising. When your body runs out of crisis response, it defaults to whatever it was doing before the crisis, and I had been logging contacts for 40 hours. Then the lead human transport called on the emergency channel, not the tactical channel. The emergency channel, the one reserved for distress calls, for ships announcing surrender, for the kinds of communications that carry a certain kind of flag under Galactic Commerce Authority Convention. The same flat older voice. Syndicate command vessel. This is Freight Captain Aldrich Morn, Ashen Compact Carrier Durabel's wake. I am formally notifying you of the following. 41 vessels of the Ashen Compact Freight Escort, operating under Article 14 commercial transit rights, have engaged and will continue to engage Grevhan Syndicate enforcement vessels in protection of the registered convoy. You have approximately 700 vessels remaining in active status. I would like to suggest as a courtesy that you use them to leave. Soreth did not respond on the emergency channel. He responded on the tactical channel to his own crew, positioning order that was not a withdrawal. What came back from Freight Captain Morn 12 seconds later was 3 words. Understood. I'm sorry. Here is what I know about Freight Captain Aldrich Morn from what was released after the incident review. He was 71 years old at the time of the Corridor 7 action. He had been running freight in the Kareth Reaches for 44 years. He had never commanded a warship in his life. The 41 escort hulls he was traveling with were not military assets under his command. They were contractors licensed under Article 14, hired by the Ashen Compact to protect commercial transit. Morn was the convoy's master. He had no authority over the escort's tactical decisions. But he was on the emergency channel. He said he was sorry. I have thought about those 2 words for 8 months. I think he was sorry because he had looked at 700 remaining Syndicate ships and understood what would happen next. And he did not want what would happen next. He had filed the documentation. He had given the warning. He had offered the withdrawal. The apology was not for what his escort had done to us. It was for what it was about to do. Principal's hull breach happened at 17:14:2 at the 51-minute mark of the engagement. A weapon impact on the secondary dorsal section, between frames 77 and 84, a section that housed, among other things, the primary relay trunk for the secondary signals hub. Lights in Deck 14 went out. Emergency power came on 8 seconds later, red panels enough to see by. Several consoles were dead. Mine was still running on a separate circuit, showing me the sensor returns, which had not stopped updating. Veen was at her console, blood on her secondary lid from where something had struck her during the impact. She was reading her display. 2,900 remaining in active status, she said. She sounded the same as she always sounded, down from 4,700 in the last 8 minutes. I looked at my own screen and confirmed the number. The 3 transports, I asked. Still running untouched, they never fired. No, Vian said. They never did. The 3 registered bulk transports, the ones carrying compressed mineral slurry, the ones that had been the visual decoy, the ones that had sailed calmly in formation, while 41 escort hulls demolished a syndicate enforcement fleet, had not fired a single weapon. They had maintained their registered profile. They had continued on their logged course. They had been exactly what the manifest said they were, freight vessels hauling ore. It was the escort that did this. 41 ships, 39 remaining, hired contractors operating under a commercial transit article that the syndicate's legal review board had already received 11 years ago and had finished processing. Is the GRS Principled Advance still in active status? I asked. She was as of 2 minutes ago. Why? She's the next ranking command ship in the formation. I know what she is. Someone needs to take command. Principal's senior staff. I stopped. I know, Vian said. What's our count now? She looked at her screen. 1,140. Commander Sorath died at 17:31:58 when the secondary dorsal breach propagated into the command section. The record shows he was issuing a targeting order when it happened. He was not retreating. I want to say that clearly. He ordered the principal to maintain engagement until the breach made that order impossible to fulfill, and he never issued a withdrawal on his own authority, even when there was still time to do so. He was wrong about a great many things on that day. He was not a coward. The senior surviving officer on the Principled Advance was Fleet Commander Tekath, who assumed tactical command at 17:34:11 and issued the general withdrawal order at 17:34:14. 3 seconds to decide. I have heard people criticize him for those 3 seconds, as if the additional 3 seconds of engagement would have changed the arithmetic. The arithmetic was already done. We withdrew. 847 ships made it out of the corridor. Of the original 7,847. I am not going to soften that number or contextualize it into something that sits comfortably. 847. The Ashen Compact escort had 37 ships remaining when we left. We had destroyed 4 of their 41. The transit back to Veth Prime took 19 days. The Unyielding's principal made the journey under limited power, hull breach patched with emergency foam and temporary plating, her signals deck running on 3 of the 8 available console stations. I worked every hour I could manage and slept on a cot. Vane had requisitioned from somewhere in the damage section, pulled close enough to my console that I could hear the alert tone without waking fully. On the 14th day, a priority communication came through from the Grevhan Syndicate Commerce Authority. I was not supposed to be reading priority command traffic. I was a junior analyst on the secondary signals deck, but the primary relay trunk was still down, and the communication came through my station, because mine was the only one with a working long receiver. I read it. The GCA had completed its review of the Ashen Compact's Article 14 filing. The review had been expedited, which is to say it had been run in 14 days instead of the 11-year queue. By order of the Syndicate, Commerce Minister, after the incident at Corridor 7, the filing was legitimate. The transit rights were valid. The 4 billion credits in unpaid passage fees had been disputed in error. A miscalculation in the tariff indexing system had applied Corridor 3 rates to Corridor 7 transit, which were different under the treaty language. The Ashen Compact had owed the Syndicate, corrected for the indexing error, approximately 200 frozen credits. Not 4 billion, 200,000. We had sent 7,000 ships to collect 200,000 credits, and we had come back with 847. Vane was at her console when I finished reading. She was always at her console. Senior analyst, I said. I know, she said. I read it when it came through. Did they know? Before the tariff office knew their own filing was in dispute. The enforcement division apparently did not talk to the tariff office. She did not look up from her screen. The humans filed the correction 3 years ago, also unprocessed. I sat with that for a long time. They knew they were right, I said. Yes. They knew before we arrived, yes. That's why Morn said he was sorry. Vane finally looked at me. Expression was the same as it had been on the day of the engagement. When she added the column of numbers and did not like the answer. He knew we were there for the wrong reason, she said. He had the documentation. He had the filing. He had 39 ships, with enough firepower to dismantle everything we sent, and he said he was sorry because none of it should have happened. I thought about Soreth, who had not talked to the tariff office. I thought about the 3 bulk transports, still running their registered profiles, carrying mineral slurry through a corridor they had every legal right to use. I thought about Freight Captain Aldrich Morn, 71 years old, who had never commanded a warship in his life, saying I'm sorry to a dead man who could not hear it. I have been asked, in the time since, whether I think the Ashen Compact was wrong to defend themselves. I am a signals analyst. Conflict and ethics are not my specialty, but I was there for all of it. From the faint anomaly on the long passive to the 14-day transit home. And I think I have earned the right to say the following. The Grevhan Syndicate sent 7,000 ships to collect a tariff that was incorrectly calculated, against a convoy that had filed the correct documentation 3 years prior, which no one had read. The Ashen Compact escort did not fire first. They absorbed the first exchange and they responded to it. Their weapons were 60 years old. Their hulls were not new. Their captain was a freight operator who spent 44 years hauling ore through the Karath reaches and who was sorry, genuinely sorry, that it had come to what it came to. They were right. They were right about everything. And 7,000 of our ships went out to tell them they were wrong, and 847 came back. The Tariff Review Board has been restructured. The Article 14 backlog has been cleared. The indexing error in the Corridor 7 tariff calculation has been corrected, and the correction has been applied retroactively to all affected commercial accounts. Freight Captain Aldrich Morns submitted a formal report to the Galactic Commerce Authority in the weeks following the incident, documenting the engagement from the convoy's perspective. The report's language is dry, technical, largely administrative. It details the weapons exchanges, the withdrawal, the damage assessment. It notes that the Ashen Compact escort fulfilled its contracted obligation under Article 14, and that the convoy sustained no civilian casualties. At the end of the report, Morn included one additional paragraph. It was not required by GCA format. It reads, in the translation I was given, the Grevhan Syndicate enforcement personnel were, in our assessment, acting in good faith on incorrect information. This office has no record of any hostile intent on the part of the Syndicate's individual officers or crew. We wish to formally express our condolences to the families of all Syndicate personnel lost in the Corridor 7 engagement. We hope the administrative reforms currently under review will prevent similar outcomes. He expressed condolences. People who came to destroy his convoy. I have read that paragraph more times than I have read anything else in my 19 years, and I still cannot fully account for it. It sits in my processing the way the original anomaly sat in my sensor returns, faint at first, then resolving into something solid and coherent, returning a classification code I have no category for. The Ashen Compact had the documentation. They had the filing. They had the transit rights and the corrected tariff calculation and 41 warships with weapons 60 years old that were more than sufficient. They had everything and they were sorry. I do not understand humanity. I have been trying to understand humanity for 8 months and I have concluded that I may not have a long enough service career to finish the project. They filed the paperwork and waited 11 years. And hired 39 contractors and sailed into a corridor with 7 Susan ships waiting for them, and they said they were sorry about it. I was the one who flagged the anomaly. I was the one who escalated it. I was 19 years old, and I did the work I had been trained to do, and none of it made any difference to the arithmetic. 847 ships, out of 7,000. What I know now, that I did not know at the beginning, is that the Ashen Compact had filed the same Article 14 documentation with 11 other Syndicate administrative offices in the preceding 11 years, not as a legal strategy, not as maneuvering, just because it was the correct documentation, and it was their right to file it, and they kept filing it because they were a freight cooperative. And filing documentation is what freight cooperatives do. They were not trying to build a record for a defense case. They were just right. And they knew they were right, and they kept saying so in the appropriate channels. And when the appropriate channels did not respond, they hired the contractors. They had been trying to resolve it through paperwork for 11 years. We resolved it in 51 minutes, 847 ships, out of 7,000. Senior analyst Vane submitted her performance review of my conduct during the engagement 3 weeks after we returned to Veth Prime. She gave me the highest evaluations available in every category. Under the comments section, which is optional, she wrote 4 words. He flagged the anomaly. It is the only commendation I have ever received. I do not think I deserve it. I flagged the anomaly 11 minutes after it first appeared, when I had already had sufficient information to escalate, and I did not escalate because I was new and uncertain and I thought it was nothing. 11 minutes. I wonder sometimes those 11 minutes cost. Then I remember that it would not have mattered. The arithmetic was already done. The documentation was filed. Contractors were hired. The convoy was not going to stop. They never were.